So, Just Cause 3 is a very interesting game. And hey, if you got an extra $20 to $30, yeah, go pick it up. It's a pretty interesting ride for the time I had with it. But I want to discuss today the idea of sandbox design. And I feel as though Just Cause 3 was marketed like it was a sandbox. And when you look into the game, it was very much built like a sandbox. For the most part, the entire game is built around these little arenas, as the footage should show you. I'm heading to a base right now. And you have these little arenas which you can do a variety of different things inside of them, destroying a bunch of stuff because carnage is the biggest deal with the game. And then you have an incredibly well fleshed out physics engine. So everything points to the idea that they wanted this to be what I would argue to be a sandbox game. The problem that I have is that I believe it actually failed at being a sandbox game. And in that failure, it actually became incredibly boring doing so. So, without further ado, I suppose we should get into it. So, before we go any further, we need to define what a sandbox game actually is, and what its, I suppose you would say, an opposite would be. So, a sandbox game, at the very base core of design, is that you create a set of mechanics, and then the player proceeds to essentially create all of their own content. It's the idea that it's exactly like Minecraft, for example, as we'll get into later. And then the exact opposite of a sandbox game would be something along the lines of, say, Call of Duty or the Metro series. Very, very linear games that have one set model and way in which you complete a certain objective that the game puts forward to you. Be that shooting an enemy and simply being skilled enough to shoot said enemy. And the two games here would be obviously Sandbox, and then what I would like to call a theme park game. Something that just simply takes you on a wild ride. And there's nothing necessarily wrong or bad about theme park games or sandbox games. There's simply different design. And in reality, most games nowadays actually use a combination of both styles. Like, the entire purpose of a game is to create a set of mechanics for you to play around in. At the end of the day, however, the most sandboxy games are usually the ones that are so open, where there's actually very little content for you to just kind of go through. You almost create all of your content, all of the joyride, as it were. So specifically, the problems that Just Cause 3 has is what amounts to the biggest problem all sandbox games tend to face. And that is, you've created these gigantic set of mechanics, and you've created this game that allows the player to move around and do amazing things within it, in theory, but then you don't balance it properly. And by that I mean, specifically in Just Cause 3, would be the simple fact that there are certain tactics within the game that are better than what is advertised, for example. So yeah, technically, you can take a helicopter and you can attach all these vehicles and all these barrels to it and create a little wrecking ball thing that you could swing around into objectives, blowing stuff up. But at the end of the day, the easier and better method is always to simply take that helicopter and just shoot stuff. The easier and better method is to simply take the guns that are provided to you throughout the entire game, which are, frankly, pretty boring in all intents and purposes, and then just shoot stuff. The easier thing to do is, instead of tethering stuff together and tying them together and making them interesting to use, you simply tether the red chaos objects to, say, the ground nearby, then simply pull, and because of that, you just kind of break them incredibly easily. So what ends up happening is you have these three major tactics and strategies that are used throughout the entire thing. And the reason that a lot of players, at least I was pushed into using those tactics, was because of three major things. And these are the major constraints within the game that push and encourage players to not use interesting and cool little sandboxy elements that fully utilize the physics engine, and instead go for these more boring and repetitive things. And by far the first and biggest one would have to be the damage that is dealt to you on a daily basis, not a daily basis, of course. And by the damage, I mean, at the end of the day, you're moving around, and you can blitz across the map incredibly easily. But if you really want to do something interesting, you have to kind of stand still. The problem is that as you stand still, because all the enemies have hit scan weapons, they now start to hit you a lot harder. And in the grand scheme of things, when you're trying to focus on other stuff, enemies actually do a lot of damage to you. A great deal of damage to you. See, it almost feels like you have to continually keep moving around or be in some vehicle that keeps you from being harmed by them that much. So, guns, which allow you to go to a higher location or to simply be moving around a lot because of their portable nature, allow you to simply kill an objective very quickly. The tether allows you to kind of walk up to an objective, tether it down as you're taking the small amount of damage, break the object because you're pulling it onto the ground that it's right beside, then leap away quickly. And then the helicopter is, of course, a helicopter. You can simply stay farther back, make sure you kill off the anti-air turrets, which I'll get onto in just a moment. And you can simply wreak havoc on the entire base without a problem. And I think Avalanche Studios, the developers for Just Cause 3, realized that the helicopter was incredibly strong as a thing. And they wanted to keep people from really utilizing it, almost cheesing the game, if that makes any sense. So, the biggest issue that we face here is that the helicopter is actually incredibly solid as a thing. And I believe Avalanche wanted to kind of force creativity from the player by fire. Trial by fire, of course. So you create a lot of these constraints, and then players are forced to then be creative in order to overcome them. Problem being is it actually does the exact opposite. So, in the game, it literally advertises the idea of a wrecking ball helicopter. Problem being is that all of the anti-air turrets, as you're probably seeing on the cameras, I hate them, they kind of end up shooting you down incredibly quickly. So, you kind of have to destroy all of the anti-air turrets, which there are at least 3 or 4 per base. And you have to destroy them all before you can do anything interesting with helicopters. Not to mention that there are other helicopters coming in to kill you. The entire game is pushing you away from using helicopters, yet they advertise the use of helicopters regardless. It's an inherent problem with the game. And because of those constraints, you're kind of pushed into using the helicopter in the normal standard way, where you're just simply kind of shooting stuff from a long distance. You're doing strafe runs. You're constantly moving around. You're not really doing anything interesting. You're either using the tether or the guns, and you're constantly swinging around trying to hit these different objectives. And it's to such a degree where the only real sandboxy elements within the game are just the movement around. The parkour system and the wingsuit, parachute, and tether combination is actually incredibly interesting. And the worst part about it is that is the only sandbox element to this entire game, I would argue, because it forces you, due to the way it works, to always be moving around. And in that, you have to almost be impromptu in the way that you constantly keep dodging enemy fire and doing things of that nature. And in that way, it becomes incredibly interesting. Problem being is that because of the fleshed out movement system, and that being like the only thing that really matters in the game space in regards to keeping you alive, that's what you end up focusing on a lot more than the physics engine itself. It's almost as if the physics engine was simply meant to make things look cool. You'll see the various buildings and structures start falling down in the footage, hopefully. And that looks very interesting and nice. But when you have such a well fleshed out physics engine, it is suggested to fully utilize it to its most extent. And I think you just saw there how I strapped the booster mines to that vehicle, hoping that it would pull the structure away. It didn't do it. Because, this vehicle weighed a little bit too much. It feels like they constrained players a bit too much. And it was to such a degree where by the end of the game, after clearing tens of these little bases that each take at least 5 or 6 minutes because of just all the enemies that are around and everything that is there, and the simple fact that everything is hidden from you, I just got kind of bored, if that makes any sense. Because the best strategy is always to use the tether, is always to use the guns, and always to use a helicopter in the standard sense. which makes things incredibly repetitive, which is exactly what we're trying to avoid in a sandbox. Now, to prove the point, I need to make it incredibly aware that players will 9 times out of 10 go for the best option for the objective at hand. If it's a close range battle, then 9 times out of 10, if you provide them with a shotgun or a sniper rifle, they're more than likely to go with the shotgun, even if the sniper rifle is more interesting to use. And the exact same thing applies to Just Cause 3. Technically, you can do all of that cool stuff, but at the end of the day, the objective is to destroy that stuff, and if the best way to destroy those red barrels, those red containers and everything, is to simply tether them to the ground, is to simply shoot them, that's what players are going to end up doing when you provide them the choice between something better and something that is pretty decent and something that's pretty bad. They're always going to go with the thing that is better than what they currently have. It's the inherent nature of progression within a game. So if there is a strategy and a tactic that rewards a great deal of carnage, of completion of objectives within a game space, relative to a low amount of skill and almost arduous task that is needed to achieve that strategy, then players are going to do it all the time. And at the end of the day, I don't think any gamer here can ever really deny that when being given the option between a weapon that is pretty fun to use and a weapon that is better, statistically, be it damage, rate of fire if it's a weapon, swing speed, the simple durability of it, etc., etc., there's some statistical bonus to it, especially for RPG players. The simple fact remains that 9 times out of 10 they're going to be moving to that other statistically better weapon, even if it is less fun to use. And that is the biggest problem regarding sandbox games, is that you have to inherently balance all of the mechanics within the game such that major strategies do not arise, or if there are major strategies, they aren't so prevailing as to get rid of all others. Now, taking that argument, and now we're going to apply it to Minecraft. And what makes Minecraft one of the best sandboxes we have ever come to know in our generation would simply be because everything you do in the game inherently benefits the objective of simple survival and of making your life better. That is the whole objective. Simply improving your stance within the game in response to the creatures, in response to needing food, etc., etc., etc. So, let's say that your very first self-made objective in the game is to simply go build a house. The problem being in Just Cause 3 is that if you were to go build a house, for whatever reason, if you were building anything in Just Cause 3, which is completely separate from the entire game, but alas, there would only be maybe one way to do it. Obviously, the game provides a myriad of other examples, but if you want to be truly practical within the game space, there's only going to be one major way. But in Minecraft, even for the most conservative of players, there is, at the end of the day, a myriad, a great variety of different house designs that you can use. You can build a house into the side of a mountain if you want to conserve, say, dirt and you really need something. You can set a house just simply out of dirt onto a plane or whatever, just on the surface. You can go out into the middle of a lake and not even have a roof or anything, just a platform floating on the lake with a bed and a chest and a crafting table. And it will function perfectly like a house, because the requirements for a home and a house in the game are incredibly broad. And those requirements are simply, it protects you from creatures, which all 3 of those examples do. Creatures cannot cross the water. Creatures will not aggro to you even if you're behind a wall, and if you are behind a wall. And creatures largely won't spawn and can't get to you if you're literally inside a mountain or underground. The next requirement is to simply be somewhere to sleep. All of those places have little spaces with a bed. Another requirement would be the refining and storage of materials, which can be easily done through the simple crafting of a chest, and it functions the exact same way as a bed. Because of these broad requirements, houses can range from anything from a giant floating battleship in the sky to an underwater laboratory. Allow creativity around the player. Now we're going to extend this a bit. Okay, you've created your incredibly practical house, fully made out of dirt or in the side of a mountain. It looks stupid, you look like a hobo. What do you do next? Well, regardless of what else you do in the game space, it will help you with your overall objective of simply survival and making your life better. So say you wanted to create a farm. Go do it. If you wanted to build a wall around your house so you can have more access to, say, the materials and you want to simply extend your range, go do it. If you want to find a cave and simply go mining inside of it for the various materials within it, go do it. It doesn't matter because of the objective being so broad within the game and the constraints of everything are incredibly small and very, very unintrusive. The player is allowed to be as creative as they want to be. And that is the bare essence of what a sandbox is trying to do. So we have to understand the very real contrasting mechanics within these two games. First and foremost, the simple fact remains that Just Cause 3 does not fully utilize its physics engine. You know, the thing that makes it that sandbox, that gives it that potential. Simply because they opted for something very, very different. So, obviously you have the Carnage bases, where you just kind of go in and you destroy stuff. Okay, whatever. That technically uses the physics engine because, you know, you're blowing shit up. Problem being is that the rest of the game does nothing of the sort. The rest of the game revolves around these little kind of side objectives, the car races or blowing other stuff up. And when you're blowing other stuff up inside the base is utilizing the specific weapons, you're utilizing specific weapons. You aren't allowed to have true full freedom. And then when you're racing around, you're going through a set of rings, like in Superman 64. Superman 64, why are we even talking about that now? But regardless of the matter, with the car and racing ones, you could simply have one point here where you started, and then a mile off you have another point, and you have to simply get there in the quickest way possible. That is interesting. That would be cool. It truly utilizes the open world nature and the full extent of the physics engine, allowing you to do all of these little impromptu, sandboxy, very decision-based things. And then with the destruction ones, when you're simply blowing stuff up with specific weapons, why are we even using weapons? Why not simply give us, say, tethers in a very large or very heavy container, and then you give us all these chaos objects, the red objects we're supposed to destroy, and you simply let us ram them with this big, heavy container. That fully utilizes the entirety of the physics engine. Yet, we're simply forced to use guns. We're forced to race through rings. Like, everything in the game is inherently restrictive to everything you want to do. And that is the whole problem with Just Cause 3. On the other hand, we have Minecraft, where regardless of what you're doing, being it farming, being it building a wall, being it cave mining, being it building a gigantic tower into the sky, simply to signal where your house is because you're lost, you're always utilizing the base interesting mechanics within the game. For Just Cause 3, it would be physics. For Minecraft, it's the building, it's the manipulation of the world, it's the destruction of everything. And the fact that you're doing that at virtually all times, regardless of what you're doing in the Minecraft, makes it an interesting game. And I'd like to reiterate that Just Cause 3, through the damage that can be dealt to you, through, I probably forgot to mention this, the ragdoll nature of everything, the fact that you ragdoll so much, and the simple fact that everything feels so slow within the game world unless you're tethering around, you feel incredibly restricted into those three major tactics, into doing stuff that any game with any basic understanding of firearms or of vehicles can do. While in Minecraft, Granted, it is easier, but due to that easier design, because you aren't being forced to use very strict building principles that, say, carpenters or mason men must fully utilize within, everyday life. The fact that the combat system is so simple and the only real enemy that causes any issue is a creeper. The fact that everything in the game is inherently meant to be easy inherently makes the game open and allows creativity at all moments. And with the objectives, and that's probably the only thing majorly similar between the two games, is that we human beings tend to want objectives within the world, to set something for ourselves or for something to be set for us. In Minecraft, the objective is simple survival, or making your life better within the game. In Just Cause 3, it's blowing stuff up. And because of Minecraft's objective being so incredibly broad within the specific game space, it allows this creativity at all times. And because of that, I can only praise Notch for what he did and what Minecraft really is. And despite the fact that I did play Just Cause 3 for a long time, I did show my hours there just to be truthful, I did enjoy it. Problem being is that I got bored. After I finished the main quest, I couldn't keep playing. It simply just became a same monotony over and over and over. But if I had a few friends in Minecraft, I could probably play that for days and days and days on end. Simply because it just is that open. And I can do all of those cool, crazy things. At the end of this video, I need to make something incredibly apparent. That sandboxy elements must always look to make the game open, to always express creativity within it, and to fully utilize the mechanics that make the game interesting. That a sandbox must always be open to every tactic that a player can use, and that any strategy the player uses within the game space must always be balanced with the other ones. Otherwise, simple human practicality will take over, and eventually you'll simply start using these other mechanics that are, these other strategies that are simply better than others. And at the end of the day, you're going to get bored, because it's going to be the exact same thing over and over and over again, especially within Just Cause 3. Thank you all for listening. This is Shapeless Horror, signing off.